Berlin, 1943. At the heart of the Reich, the city pulsed with confidence and defiance. Its skies were a fortress, bristling with flak batteries, radar towers, and Luftwaffe patrols. German pilots walked the streets and mess halls with an air of certainty, convinced that no Allied bomber could ever slip through their defenses undetected. Nighttime raids on the capital were spoken of with mockery, dismissed as an impossible fantasy. "Berlin is untouchable," they told each other over mugs of coffee and cigarettes. "Only fools would try." This confidence wasn't born from nothing. For years, the Luftwaffe had built Berlin into one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth. Searchlights swept the skies like white blades, anti-aircraft guns waited on rooftops, and radar installations scanned the horizon for the faintest hint of incoming aircraft. Any pilot daring enough to reach this city at night, the Germans believed, would be torn apart long before their bombs ever touched the ground. And yet, the war was changing. Across the Channel, the Royal Air Force had been hammering German cities relentlessly. Hamburg, Cologne, and Essen had burned under the weight of nighttime raids. The glow of destruction lit the skies of Europe, but Berlin remained something different. Area bombing raids reached it, yes, but the idea of striking Berlin with precision, with timing, with surgical accuracy, that was thought suicidal. German pilots scoffed at the notion, calling it madness. No bomber could fly into the Reich's capital, drop its payload exactly where it wanted, and then escape into the night. But in the quiet hangars of Britain, an answer was being built. Not a fortress of steel like the Lancaster or the Flying Fortress. Not a lumbering formation of dozens, but a sleek, fast phantom that carried only 2 men. It was made not from the expected armor of aluminum, but from plywood and balsa wood, an aircraft so light and so quick that its very existence defied the logic of traditional air combat. The de Havilland Mosquito. To German pilots, the idea was laughable. A wooden bomber. They joked that it would burn the moment it was hit, that such a machine couldn't possibly withstand the fury of war. But for the men who flew it, the Mosquito was a weapon unlike any other. It didn't need heavy guns bristling from turrets. Its defense was speed. Its protection was altitude. Its power lay in the simple fact that by the time you saw it, it was already gone. As Berlin's citizens went about their lives under the banner of the swastika, they trusted in the invisible shield above their heads. Anti-aircraft gunners drilled at their posts. Luftwaffe squadrons rotated through their night patrols. Hitler and his generals boasted that the capital of the Reich was untouchable. And in that certainty lay their weakness. Because far across the Channel, British planners had already set their sights on the very heart of Nazi Germany. And they would send not a massive bomber stream to do it, but a small formation of wooden shadows that would test Berlin's defenses and strike at its pride. The Luftwaffe's arrogance would soon be broken not by brute force, but by a wooden wonder that carried the war directly into the enemy's capital, undetected. When the story of the Mosquito is told, it begins not in the skies above Europe, but in the mind of one man, Geoffrey de Havilland. At a time when every air ministry in the world demanded bigger, heavier, more heavily armed machines, de Havilland gambled on a radical idea. He believed that a bomber didn't need a wall of machine guns to survive. It didn't need armor plates and turrets bristling from its frame. What it needed was the ability to outrun everything that tried to kill it. Speed would be its armor, agility would be its defense. The proposal sounded absurd. His design called for an aircraft built largely of wood, spruce, birch, and balsa. Metal was in short supply in Britain, but wood was plentiful, and de Havilland understood that a wooden frame could be both strong and light. His vision was a bomber that could fly so high, so fast, and so smoothly that German interceptors would never touch it. The skeptics were everywhere. Traditionalists inside the Air Ministry shook their heads. A wooden plane in the age of steel, a bomber with no defensive armament. To them, it seemed like lunacy. But de Havilland pressed on, gathering craftsmen and engineers who shaped the first prototypes with the same care as master boatbuilders. The Mosquito took form in secrecy, its polished wooden skin hiding a power that no one yet believed in. The Germans laughed openly when they learned of it. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, derided it as nothing more than a plywood toy. To him, the Reich's fighters would shred it with ease, and the vaunted defenses of the fatherland would remain secure. In his arrogance, Göring underestimated what wood and genius could achieve. The Mosquito proved itself quickly. In reconnaissance, it flew faster than anything the Germans could scramble against it. Photographs of enemy airfields and cities were delivered with unprecedented clarity and speed. As a bomber, it could strike with pinpoint accuracy, darting in and out of hostile skies before the defenders even realized it was there. Then came its role as a fighter bomber. Armed with cannons and rockets, the Mosquito hunted trains, airfields, and submarines with deadly precision. It became a pathfinder, guiding slower bomber streams by marking targets with flares. It served as a night fighter, intercepting German aircraft in the dark with radar. It was an aircraft of 100 uses, each one proving more effective than the last. And through it all, one truth became undeniable: the Mosquito was too fast to catch. It could outrun the Messerschmitt Bf 109. It could slip away from the Focke-Wulf 190. Even the vaunted jet projects of Germany had difficulty pinning it down. Two men, encased in plywood, could streak across Europe and return home with nothing more than a wisp of flak smoke on their tail. In briefing rooms and airfields across Britain, Mosquito crews began to whisper with pride. They knew they flew something extraordinary, something that defied the rules of air combat. And in London, RAF planners began to wonder, could this strange machine, this wooden wonder, do the unthinkable? Could it strike at the very core of the Reich? Could it reach Berlin itself, the city no one believed could be touched with precision, and shatter the arrogance of German air power? The answer would come in the dark days of 1943, when the Mosquito was unleashed not just as a bomber, but as a weapon of humiliation. And in the heart of Berlin, under the proud gaze of the Luftwaffe, it would write its name into history. January 30, 1943. All across Germany, banners hung from buildings, swastikas draped every balcony, and Nazi officials gathered in Berlin for a day of spectacle. It was the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, a decade since the Nazi Party had seized control. Ceremonies had been planned down to the minute. The Reichstag would host a special session, the Führer would speak to his people, and Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring would broadcast his words of pride and defiance to the nation over live radio. For the German people, it was meant to be a demonstration of power, unity, and destiny. For the Allies, it was the perfect stage to strike. Across the Channel in England, in the cold morning air, a small squadron of de Havilland Mosquitoes stood ready on their airfields. These were not massive bomber formations that blotted out the sky. They were small, surgical strikes with crews of just 2 men each, pilot and navigator, strapping themselves into cockpits of polished wood. Engines roared to life, twin Merlins humming with lethal promise. The men knew their mission: fly straight into the heart of Berlin, time their run to the speeches, and strike where the enemy's pride was most vulnerable. The Mosquitoes lifted off, climbing quickly into the gray winter skies. They flew in loose formation, hugging the clouds, relying on a mix of radio navigation beams, dead reckoning, and the steady hand of each navigator plotting their course across occupied Europe. Below them stretched a continent at war, fields scarred by battle, rivers winding past bombed-out towns, forests concealing German convoys. Yet the mosquitoes pressed forward, invisible phantoms in the overcast, their wooden frames whispering through the air at speeds that left most fighters far behind. Inside Berlin, the ceremonies began. Nazi officials filed into their grand halls, uniforms gleaming, medals pinned to their chests. Outside, civilians crowded the streets, clutching radios, ready to hear Göring's words. The Reichsmarschall, dressed in his resplendent white uniform, adjusted his papers and prepared to speak into the microphone. The broadcast connected across Germany, echoing into homes, schools, and factories. At that same moment, high above the city, the first mosquitoes reached their target. The timing was surgical. Just as Göring's speech began, bombs whistled down through the cloud cover. Explosions ripped through the capital, shattering the calm and silencing the broadcast. Across the nation, radios cut out mid-sentence. Instead of triumph and propaganda, the German people heard static. In Berlin, glass shattered, smoke billowed, and sirens wailed. Panic swept through the streets as anti-aircraft guns thundered into the sky. At the Reichstag, chaos erupted. Officials scrambled for cover, as the roar of detonations drowned out their carefully planned anniversary. Hitler's carefully orchestrated display of control had been turned into a moment of humiliation. The pride of the Nazi capital was pierced, not by a vast armada, but by a handful of wooden bombers, precise and unstoppable. The Luftwaffe's defenses responded with fury. Searchlights clawed at the sky, flak bursts filled the clouds with black puffs, and night fighters scrambled from nearby airfields. But the mosquitoes were already gone, their speed carrying them beyond reach. Not a single one was lost. They slipped back into the night as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving behind a shaken capital and a Reich embarrassed before its own people. For Göring, it was a personal insult. The man who had promised that no enemy aircraft would ever reach Berlin had been proven a liar live on his own broadcast. His rage was volcanic. In private, he fumed to his staff that the British could fly over Berlin as if they owned the air. The shame burned deeper because he had once dismissed the mosquito as a plywood toy. Now that toy had silenced his speech and shown the Luftwaffe powerless in its own skies. The mosquitoes returned again and again. Precision raids harassed Berlin at moments of Nazi pride, striking symbols of power rather than leveling the city. They were not about destruction but humiliation, each mission a reminder that the Reich was vulnerable. The wooden bombers outpaced German interceptors, slipped through the net of radar and flak, and disappeared back into the night. For Berliners, the message was clear: the city was not untouchable. For the Luftwaffe, it was a bitter humiliation. And for the Allies, it was proof that speed and cunning could do what brute force could not. In the shadow of those January raids, a new truth settled over the war. Even in the heart of Nazi Germany, no one was safe from the reach of the mosquito. The raids of the mosquito did not level Berlin. They did not leave behind the smoking ruins of 1,000 bombers or bury the city in rubble as the Lancasters and flying fortresses would later do. Instead, they struck something more fragile: the illusion of safety. For years, Berliners had been told their capital was untouchable, that Göring's Luftwaffe would never allow a bomber to reach the heart of the Reich. But in January 1943, a handful of wooden aircraft shredded that illusion in a matter of minutes. The physical damage was small: shattered windows, disrupted ceremonies, brief fires that were quickly extinguished. But the psychological impact was immense. Ordinary Germans, huddled around radios across the nation, heard the silence as Göring's broadcast was cut short by bombs. The Reich's leaders, so accustomed to speaking from a pedestal of invulnerability, were suddenly scrambling for cover in their own capital. The effect on morale was undeniable. If wooden bombers could reach Berlin at will, what else might follow? Even Göring himself, the man who had once dismissed the Mosquito as a plywood toy, was forced to confront reality. His fury after the first raids gave way to bitterness. In a rare moment of honesty, he admitted, "When I saw the Mosquito, I knew the war was lost." It was not just speed and precision that defeated him. It was the humiliation of knowing that Britain could send 2 men in a wooden aircraft across the length of Germany, strike Berlin, and return home without loss. That was the true symbolic power of the Mosquito. It did not need to fly in vast formations or drop thousands of tons of bombs. Its victories were measured in moments of disruption, in shattered pride, in the realization that even the Reich's strongest shields could be pierced by shadows. 2 men, a pilot and a navigator, could do more to rattle the confidence of the Luftwaffe than an entire bomber stream lumbering over the Ruhr. By the war's end, the Mosquito had become one of the most successful and versatile aircraft of the conflict. It served as a bomber, a reconnaissance plane, a night fighter, a pathfinder, and even a maritime strike aircraft. Its speed was unmatched, its adaptability unrivaled. In every role it took on, it excelled. And yet, it was those precision raids on Berlin that left one of the deepest impressions. Not because of their destruction, but because of what they revealed, that speed, stealth, and daring could outmatch brute force. The legacy of the Mosquito endures not just in aviation history, but in the memory of that winter night, when Berlin's skies were lit with frantic searchlights and exploding flak. And there, beyond the chaos, sleek wooden silhouettes vanished into the darkness, proof that a wooden wonder could humiliate an empire built on arrogance. Where are you watching this from right now? I'd love to know which country you're tuning in from as we dive deeper into this story.